college landscape is changing daily. There's some fault at the NCAA level to have fought all of these lawsuits all along and not figured out a way to evolve. How much are the Division I institutions or Division IIs, to that matter, that are probably in the upper tier of that division using the lower Division Is and IIs and IIIs as a farm system? I'm extremely proud of the product that our institutions have put together and the work that our coaches have done to build what I believe to be a nationally recognized Division III conference. The 50th year is the time to start the Hall of Fame, and let's go with a class of 50. It doesn't really matter how you personally think about it, right? It matters what the rule is. There was a lot of discussion going on, and ongoing discussion about interpretations of Title IX and what the Biden administration was doing with that at the time. Within the NCAA rules, within Division III rules, you can do it, but you can't induce somebody to come and you can't pay them to play. I want athletics to complement what we're doing. I want it to help drive it, but ultimately that's not the goal here, right? The goal is for someone to enter college, get an education, and go out and be a better person and contribute to society.
Welcome to another edition of No Holds Barred. I'm Rich Roth, and my guest today is the commissioner of the Old Dominion Athletic Conference, the ODAC, Brad Bankston. Hi, Brad.
Rich, hey, hello.
How are you?
I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
I am too. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. Obviously, the world of college athletics is changing dramatically, and most people see what's going on at the Division I level, but we'll talk a little bit about what's going on there, but also how it's trickling down and impacting the Division III level. And you have so many member institutions right here in our area in Central and Southwestern Virginia. And really, as far as sports go, one of the best sports conferences in Division III.
Well, we like to think so.
Yeah, sure.
I don't want to toot our horn, but because it's certainly not me. It's our membership that's done such a great job with their programs and their athletic department and the staff that they have and the emphasis that they put on athletics, as the complement to the educational mission of their institutions. It's been a great ride.
And you've been there, I'll say it, 30 years.
A long ride.
30 years.
As we were just alluding to. Yeah.
As the commissioner, undergrad in Chapel Hill, and your graduate degrees from Virginia Tech. Any rooting allegiances there when those two schools square off?
It's funny. When I was at Virginia Tech, which was the early 90s to the mid 90s, they were struggling from an identity standpoint to kind of find a niche, right? They were in the Big East in football and may have still been. I think they were in the Metro in basketball. So that's really kind of dialing it back. I think that's probably where they were. So I worked in the athletic department there, and it's tough. I had really close friends when I was there. It was one of my best stories is when I got there it would have been the summer of 92. Dave Brain was the athletic director there, and Dave Brain is a North Carolina graduate. And I was walking down the hall, and I ran into Dave, and one of the first things he said to me is he kind of stared at my chest, and I was wearing a North Carolina sweatshirt or T-shirt or whatever it was, right, that I had at that time, and he kind of gave me this, very stern look and said, "Not here." And I said, "Duly noted." And I made sure that I made a trip to the bookstore and I was in Hokie apparel for all my other extended stays in the athletic department when I was there.
Carolina athletics. Just real quick to sidetrack to that. And so you were there late 80s, early 90s?
Exactly right. I watched the documentary on the 93 championship team that the ACC network did. I actually watched it last night, and it actually is a ton of nostalgia for me because I was out. I graduated in 92, but I went back with my college roommates. We made the pilgrimage to New Orleans for the Final Four, and just a ton of great memories. And to see, a guy like Eric Montross, who's no longer with us, but the significant contribution that he had made and the impact that he had on those his fellow teammates and just their reaction. It was a really well done piece.
And now Bill Belichick heading up the football. Did you ever see that one coming?
I'm not sure anybody ever saw that one coming, including some of the administration may not have seen that one coming based on the reports that I've heard. But, I'm fortunate enough that I can live vicariously through my youngest son. Our youngest son, Burke, is is there as a student now. He's a junior, and he's working in the athletic department and sitting at the press table at basketball games, kind of just like I did. So it's I hope he understands just how cool that is, or at least in my mind, it was super cool.
What's does he have aspirations of, kind of following in your footsteps to a degree, to be a conference commissioner, or what does he want to do?
Yeah, the funny piece of that is I think he's going into construction management. So he's using this as just an opportunity to stay in touch and learning more about athletics when he's there. And he's done some internships with a construction management company that I think he's probably going to pursue after he leaves college. So yeah, nope. I'm not sure he's willing to, the succession plan in the ODAC office may not be for my son to take over. Like Belichick's apparently succession plan was originally when he was hired, that they wanted to have his son be in the coach in waiting. So no, we're not working in that world in that space.
That's a wild story down there, isn't it?
It is that.
You think he'll turn it around? Do you think he'll stay?
It's a great question. I hope he does. I mean, you have to think that his age is not conducive necessarily to being in the seat for a long period of time. So I would hope they'd have some return this year from a standpoint of wins and losses. I think last year was a disappointment, and maybe they're learning the college space. And as you said at the beginning of the conversation, that the college landscape is changing daily, weekly, and what they were dealing with then is entirely different than it is now. And you've got the House settlement, and you've got the institutions that are able to compensate athletes with up to $20.5 million. And I think that's going to grow over time from an inflationary standpoint. But then what collectives are doing and how organized were they when they got there? I mean, it's not 1992 when I left there, or 1994 when I left Virginia Tech. I mean, it's a very difficult job at that level for sure.
And I do want to dive into that more a little bit, not just at the D1 level, but certainly, how that's impacting you guys. Because, in our phone conversation, just setting this up, you were even talking about how NIL and all that has trickled down to the high school level. And I mean, it feels like the Wild West. And I think a lot of us are out there sitting there going, yes, I think, it's fair for college athletes to be paid. But what we're seeing now, and guys in their 7th year, and, what we just saw from, the quarterback at Miami, Beck, talking about, no, I don't go to class. Are you kidding me? I graduated 3 years ago. Why would I go to class? Yeah. It's like, well, you're at college. Like, it's just a wild scene right now.
It's just not what we all understood and went through on our own, right? Especially the perception that a student athlete is going to class. But I can assure you that all the athletes that are at our level, at the Division III level, certainly are. And there are unique circumstances where people have the additional opportunity to play and have eligibility. But, there's still requirements that you have to be enrolled in a certain number of classes to be able to do that. What's going on at the Division I level, I'm not super familiar with from a standpoint of eligibility. But if you just read the news and you follow what's happening at the NCAA level with lawsuits, there's one after another, week to week, where people are looking for other avenues to be able to stay. And it's because it's more profitable for them to do that than to subject themselves, using football as an example, right, to subject themselves to the opportunity to be able to play in the NFL or the CFL, or, even all the other sundry kind of professional opportunities that are there, that it's not lucrative in the same way that the college game has been to them. So, they're looking for any opportunity to say, hey, well, my JUCO years where I didn't have this opportunity, now I want to convert those years to Division I, where I have an opportunity to have NIL revenue or be compensated by the institution. So, there's some fault at the NCAA level to have fought all of these lawsuits all along and not figured out a way to evolve and not find yourself being on the other side of a lawsuit. You look at the Austin case in the Supreme Court, where it was a 9-0 decision against the NCAA, and it did not paint a pretty picture of their road going forward from a legal standpoint. And again, I'm not a legal scholar, so I've just watched it from afar and realized that they're not winning, or they weren't winning a lot of those cases, and they knew they needed to do something different. You wish somebody would have looked in a crystal ball 5 years before that and figured out, hey, maybe there's a way for us to get there. But, now you're dealing with contracts, you're dealing with, agreements that people have made. There's compensation that's changing hands. Naturally, somebody's going to want more, And naturally, somebody's going to want to hold somebody accountable for whatever it is that they've agreed to pay them.
And I think you're right. I mean, it's like every time we turn around, it's something else. There are 26, 27-year-old kids, right? Men still playing college sports. We're seeing athletes who have been at 5 or 6 or 7 different colleges. Most recently, the quarterback from Duke, has a deal, and now Duke might be suing him because he's in the portal and wants to go somewhere else after signing that deal. Dante Moore, right, would have been almost a guaranteed top 2 pick in the NFL draft, worth $50 million, and he decides to stay in school for one more year. And it's a whole different world right now.
It is, and it's at the elite level. You're seeing those students or student athletes that are staying and wanting to do it for money. You have to remember that there are a lot of other people there that aren't in that category, that are there for, and not to say that those individuals aren't there for the right reasons, but are there for their own reasons to obtain a degree, to be able to go out and use that degree to their benefit as they move forward. And all the benefits that college athletics provides to those that participate with, teamwork and cooperation and leadership skills and, physical, just the training regimen alone of being able to stay involved in those type things, the camaraderie that you're building, I think is invaluable for those people. So I always felt like there was a return, despite the fact you may have just gotten a scholarship, or a lot of people out there may not even understand that at the Division I level, the majority of those people that are playing scholarship sports don't have full scholarships in those sports, right? So because of that, there's a return, and you were getting something out of that, just simply having the opportunity to participate and be a part of that team. And if part of your tuition or room and board was paid for by the college, that was great. I'd never felt like you weren't getting something out of it. And hopefully, and I do believe that there are people out there that still understand that and still are happy with the experience, because it's an amazing opportunity for sure. And it doesn't matter whether it's the Division I, Division II level, Division III, NAIA. I mean, you're able to continue playing the sport that you love. And that's really how we find, I know that's how our schools and our institutions or our athletic departments are approaching that with their student athletes.
A lot of those skills that you just talked about, or opportunities, or whatever word you want to describe, the learning teamwork, the learning time management, the opportunity to grow as a person, to learn the leadership skills, or the importance of, I said teamwork already, but all that's so important later on in life in the business world. And, business people certainly look at that and look favorably on people who played sports at the college level, regardless of which level it was. Talk for a minute or two about the differences between Division I, Division II, and Division III.
Well, at the Division I level, you're playing for scholarships. They've now instituted roster limits at the Division I level. There used to be walk-ons. There really aren't any walk-ons now. There were scholarship limits where there really aren't as many scholarship limits as much as there used to be. There used to be equivalency sports where you had, 12 scholarships for baseball. You might carry 35 student athletes. And I'm not well enough versed to know their rules now, but now you may be limited to 35 student athletes, and you may be able to fully scholarship all of them. I know that they're kind of working their way through that process. At the division, what is the FCS level? That's a football level at Division I, where you're playing football. Your scholarship limits are less than they are at the FBS level. And then you get to Division II, and it's just a stair step down. Division II offers the opportunity to be able to grant aid for athletics ability, so you're able to receive a scholarship. Certainly not at the same level at Division I, and their requirements about what you have and don't have to do from an institutional perspective can vary. And at the Division III level, it's very simple. There's no athletically related aid that's given to the student. Now, that doesn't mean if you have need-based aid that you can't receive need-based aid. That doesn't mean if you're a good student or you've done other things in the community where institutions can provide you what they call merit-based aid. They're still doing that. And a lot of the conversation in our world has been, how are our institutions, who are all private? There's still some Division III institutions in the state of Virginia. Christopher Newport's one, Mary Washington's another, that how are we pricing ourselves? I mean, how are our institutions as private institutions pricing themselves to stay competitive with a JMU or Virginia Tech, a Mary Washington, a CNU, and by discounting their tuition, often cases, they are right in that wheelhouse between tuition and room and board, where it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You're making a choice then about whether you want to go play athletics necessarily. Even at some people even have the opportunity maybe at a JMU or Virginia Tech in the old days to walk on and be a participant there. Or do you want to play at the Division III level, or do you want to play at the Division II level, which is also an option where you may be able to get to play sooner and save and still have the same opportunity to be able to participate, or more so have the ability to participate and contribute.
You mentioned Mary Washington and Christopher Newport.
Yeah.
Is there some sort of rule? Because I know in some sports, and I'm not familiar with all, where they're bouncing around in different conferences or not affiliated anywhere, and sitting there going, man, it would seem like a great fit for them to be in the Old Dominion Athletic Conference. But
Great question.
Is it because they're state schools?
It is. The charter of the ODAC, which goes back to 1975, and it's interesting. We're doing some archiving in the office, and I went back and started reading some of the old minutes from when the league was formed back in the mid-'70s. The NCAA made a choice at that point in time between the college and the university division. So this is really taking it back a long ways. And those institutions in the state that were charter members of the ODAC were all private at the time. They made the choice to create a league that was based on 4-year degree granting private institutions. And it doesn't mean that you have to be in the state of Virginia, even though our name's certainly indicative with the Old Dominion State, right? Because we have Guilford. We have Guilford College, who is in Greensboro, that participates. So you're not the first person to ask that question. Certainly from the CNU and the Mary Washington perspective, and we always, I guess, we could change the charter and the bylaws of the league, but up to this point, we haven't. The membership hasn't had a desire to want to do that at this point.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Circling back a little bit to one of the differences between Division I and Division III, what we're seeing at the Division I level, hearing, and again, who knows how it's going to shake out, but because of the way conferences are realigning and the way money's being distributed to the revenue generating sports, there's a lot of talk that, the Olympic sports, the non-revenue sports, might be in trouble at some point. And I don't know when or if that happens, but it almost seems like it's almost the exact opposite at the Division III level, because you guys, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you're using sports to bring people into the school, right? I mean, it's not so much about what they're going to get out of it, but someone who may want to play lacrosse, may want to go to Lynchburg College or the University of Lynchburg, where they might not have ever thought about that, but because of the program Coach Kadelka's built, they want to go there. And so you use that as almost a recruiting tool to get people to come to the colleges.
That's exactly right. I think what's happening at the Division I level, and I'm not sure anybody can read the tea leaves and know what's coming around the corner. I hope that they work for the preservation of all the quote unquote Olympic sports that they have. At our level, all the sports are non-revenue, or you could say they're all revenue generating from the perspective that there are students that are on campus participating in those sports, and as a result, they're a part of the student body. And we probably go from 30%, maybe a little bit shy of that number, to as much as 45% of our students that are participating not only in the institution, but are also a member of a varsity athletic program. So we're doing the opposite. We're looking for opportunities that may be out there, such as men's volleyball as an additional sport that we added a number of years ago. We've just kind of reinvested in wrestling. Wrestling was I don't want to say a dead sport for us, but we had wrestling from 76 to 1980. They discontinued it. And wrestling was really in the crosshairs of a lot of changes going on at other levels regarding Title IX, more opportunities for women to be able to participate. And in doing that, wrestling programs kind of dried up. They dried up at our level. They dried up at Division II and Division I level. And wrestling had a resurgence. And for whatever reason, some of our institutions had one stuck with it. Washington and Lee had a wrestling program pretty much the entire time. our institution's kind of reinvested in wrestling, and it's excelling. For example, Roanoke College 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, went halfway across the country to one of the biggest wrestling tournaments in Division III, and pretty much washed through everybody. They ran through the whole thing, and what a tribute to them and the product that they've been building in Salem with their program. Coach Yetzer has done an amazing job, but we're seeing wrestling grow. We're now looking at flag football. And if you follow the NFL, which I'm sure many of your sports fans that listen do, and you're seeing a lot of ads. I think even flag football is going to be an Olympic sport in 2028. So we're starting to kind of dip our toe in flag football. We have 3 programs that have started, and we're hoping that continues to kind of grow. And I could see us sponsoring a championship by 2028. So
wow.
We're doing not to say the Division I's working, it's working against them, but there's so many different dynamics that are changing at the Division I level. The transfer portal is another, right? You've got all the changes taking place at the transfer portal. You talk about trickle down. What are the opportunities that are being provided for high school students now that at the Division I level really isn't happening, may not be happening as much. I read an article the other day by a high school AD just talking about the challenges of the transfer portal and preparing student athletes at the high school level of understanding kind of what's happening at the Division I level.
Because that really
Very
is
difficult.
That really is affecting high school students.
Certainly could be.
With all the transferring going on. I've even heard of coaches who don't even bother to recruit high school kids anymore because they're just going into the portal. And you can certainly see the advantage of that. Guys are bigger, stronger, girls too, older, more mature, but they've also they also know what it's like at the college level, because regardless of what level you're at, D1, D2, D3, it's a world of difference competing in a college sport than it is in a high school sport.
It is. Maturity does a lot of things for people. I think we could all agree with that, right? We all needed to grow up at some point in time. And that's something that coaches are probably looking for. And I think that we need to kind of continue to keep an eye on at our level of how impactful is the transfer portal going to be for the development of the high school athlete, and the more opportunities that we can provide, the roster limits that are taking place at the Division I level. Is there trickle down of students that aren't, or student athletes that aren't given the opportunity at the Division I level, maybe even through the Division II and Division III level, that we become a fit for them as we move down? And I think it's too early to tell that yet. I've heard some of our coaches groups speculate about that. And we've had the opposite. We've had students even through the COVID years. I'm not sure we're out of the COVID years yet. They seem to be sticking with this in perpetuity. But we've had student athletes that had additional years left in a sport, specifically spring sports, because that 2020 spring season was the one that really gave a lot of opportunity back to those athletes. We had student athletes that left to go to Division I.
In some cases, they got 2 years.
That's exactly right.
Because
that's exactly right.
That's when COVID hit, was in February, March, and then it impacted the next year as well. So if you played a spring sport, there really was an opportunity to get 2 years back.
That's right. And, we had students that left to get a graduate degree at a Division I institution and played a year. So that's another, how much are the Division I institutions, or Division IIs to that matter, that are, probably in the upper tier of that division, using the lower Division Is and IIs and IIIs as a farm system, as students kind of have the ability. And you have the portal where people are transferring as unlimited opportunities. It's, I think you said the wild, wild west. I think we're still trying to, figure out who's in charge, which sheriff is in charge.
And that might almost depend on, what election cycle we're in, right?
That's not a bad thought either. You're right.
High school kids, how things have changed in college. How are you seeing and hearing it directly impact athletes in high school who want to go on to play at college? And again, understanding your level of expertise, or obviously much more at the Division III than knowing what's going on at the Division I. But what are you hearing? What are you seeing, and how it's impacting high school students? Because obviously in our area, we probably have a bunch of parents who have kids, and the opportunity to play D1 sports is very small, but the opportunity to play D3 sports is great. And but it is impacting kids, right?
I think it is. And I think we were just, as we talked about the transfer portal, how much that's going to impact the opportunity for high school students to have entry-level opportunity at
Is
the
it
college
tougher
level.
now because of the transfer portal?
I don't know that firsthand. I have to think speculatively that it probably is. And, but there's still X number of athletes, right? There's still the opportunity that these student athletes want to be able to play and continue past their high school and their club years. So knowing that that's an opportunity for them, there's opportunity to play. And I think that's true not only of the Division III institutions in our league and other leagues, as well as Division II opportunities where people have the opportunity to participate. And there is a very minuscule percentage, and I'm not sure what that number is, of high school athletes that eventually go forward to play at the college game. So it's not a come one, come all kind of environment. It's very competitive. I'm extremely proud of the product that our institutions have put together and the work that our coaches have done to build what I believe to be a nationally recognized Division III conference that contends for national bids, contends for national championships in various sports. And, some of our strongest sports have been on the women's side. We've had a tremendous amount of success in the sport of softball. We've had one institution that's won 3 national championships in Division III softball. We've had a lot of success in Division III women's soccer, and we've also had a lot of benefit on the men's side as well. So we're doing everything we can, I think, to supply a great product for people to find, and it's our coaches' job to go out there and sell the product. My hope is that the conference provides them a competitive environment in which people feel they feel welcome, they have the opportunity to compete, and it's good, solid competition in an environment that is rewarding for them as a student athlete. I mean, you talk about what Division III and Division I differences are. I really believe one of them is balance. I hear our coaches talk about it. I just left the NCAA convention. We had a roundtable discussion with 1,200 people in the room and everybody kind of talking about and sharing the values of what makes Division III special. It's the balance. It's the opportunity that you have as a student to not only play athletics at a competitive level, but also study abroad, perhaps, have the opportunity to do an internship in the summer. I think the differences at the Division I level, and I'm not casting dispersions on them, but they're invested maybe in the totality of the year, more so the entire academic year, more so than they are at the Division III level. It doesn't mean our student athletes don't want to compete. They don't want to get better, because I think they're in the weight room and they're training and they're practicing, making every effort to improve. I know our coaches are doing the same, but there's a balance there that provides the opportunity to those students.
Well, and you had talked about, the differences in scholarship levels, right? Division I, Division II, Division III doesn't have athletic scholarships. Right. But along the lines of what you're talking about the balance, there are also different rules for how often you're able to practice in the off season. Yeah. Right. So at the Division I level, I mean, especially the revenue sports that we touched on before, that's big bucks. I mean, that's why we're seeing Stanford in the ACC, right? The Atlantic Coast Conference. We've got teams from California.
The All Coast Conference.
The All Coast.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But, it's all driven by money. And when there's that much money involved, it almost feels like for a lot of the kids, the academic part is secondary, and it feels like there are rules in place at the Division III level to make sure that doesn't happen and really maintain that student-athlete balance.
Exactly right. I mean, we have the opportunity to practice out of season, which is what they call the non-traditional season. So just using soccer as an example, your traditional season's the fall. That's when you have the national championship. So we also have a spring season, but that spring season's limited to X number of days, and you have to be very purposeful about using one day. One student athlete practicing with the coach would be using a team day. So our coaches are they're very purposeful about making sure that they spread that out over the semester. They don't overload the student athletes throughout the spring semester, using soccer as the example. And one of the other rules that we don't have at Division III that other divisions do is, what are your eligibility rules? How much can you practice and not use a season of eligibility? Division III just had this proposal on the table for a convention a week ago, the old redshirting rule. If anybody follows what redshirting means, it's basically practicing without competing doesn't use one of your 4 seasons of eligibility. And Division III had a proposal on the table that would have allowed reinstituted redshirting. It existed until the mid-2000s, I think 2004. The rule was removed. It was disallowed, and this new rule would have permitted it moving forward, and it was defeated. So the membership's still standing by a philosophy that it has stated and restated several years ago that talks about it being a primarily, not a totality, a primarily 4-year experience at the Division III level. So the idea is that if it's going to take you 4 years to graduate, you're there to play 4 years of athletics, and then you go out and you do great things. And some of that's getting lost, as we discussed earlier, at the Division I level. And I think their Division III, there's a lawsuit at the NCAA right now that there's a basketball player at the Division III level that started Division I, and he sued the NCAA to get a year back based on the fact that he was given erroneous information from his previous institution. He's currently playing now because there's an injunction based on the fact that he has this lawsuit, this ongoing lawsuit. And but we don't see a lot of that happening in Division III.
Just to kind of follow up, because I'm not familiar with that, might that have something to do with, he redshirted in Division I and saying, hey, look, it was legal for me to do it there? Or was it a different deal?
I do think it has something to do with a waiver and the fact that he competed later in the season. So there are eligibility rules that say if you're going to have a hardship, and I think we've seen, or redshirt, there's a new opportunity at the FBS level that I just saw that was labeling a red shirt 9 games. You could play 9 games and still declare a red shirt.
And they only play 12. So you're playing 3/4 of the season.
Which is crazy. There has to be some reasoning behind that. But, I think even at the Division II level, there's some rules that basically state that red shirting, you can play as many as 4 games and still be able to red shirt. So we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out.
All different all over the place, which has got to make it tough.
You know what? I do the best I can to put my hat on every day, go into work, and you never know which hat you're going to be switching to, but that's pretty much it's made the last 30 years fun.
You had mentioned waivers. There are waivers that exist at the Division III level. If someone misses a year because of an injury, they would be eligible to play again. So you really do want to give people an opportunity to play 4 years, but not because you're just sitting out and practicing, I guess.
No, I think everybody's wrestling with eligibility now, and you're exactly right. There's a hardship waiver. You can play a third of the games. You have to be injured before the first half of the season. So there's a reason why you're getting the year back. There are waivers for seasons of participation. There are waivers for running out of semesters. You have 10 semesters to play for 4 years, basically, with the idea that you're going to finish probably in 4 years. There are kids coming into college now, students coming in with 30 hours or more, or with an associate's degree, so they could be out sooner than 4 years. So we're all trying to balance that conversation and determining kind of what that looks like long term. And I feel like we're in a really good place. There are plenty of opportunities for waivers, but I think we're going to continue to see this conversation about 5 years. Division II just addressed it. They just referred it back to committee. There was a proposal on the table for Division II to have 5 years of eligibility in your sport with no waivers. So I think it's difficult not to have waivers. There's always going to be somebody that believes they have an extenuating circumstance that deserves a waiver, but it would be 5 to play 5.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So much for the 4-year college experience.
It's not the old world. It's not what we were accustomed to. So we're all trying to adjust and evolve, whatever that looks like.
50 years this year, 50th anniversary of the Old Dominion Athletic Conference. Wow, that's a huge milestone. You guys are cranking out now a Hall of Fame, so you have some big things going on in 2026.
It's been such a joy, to think we got to 50 and then looking to say, okay, what are we going to do when we get to 50? Everybody wants to, what's the celebration? And well, let's just keep doing what we've been doing. We've been doing it well for 49 years. What's the 50th difference? But we've had an ongoing conversation about how do we honor those people that were foundational pillars for the conference. And we had a very active group of our sports information directors, specifically 2 of our guys, Richie Wagner and Phil Stanton, who led the charge of saying the 50th year is the time to start the Hall of Fame, and let's go with a class of 50. So I've had the honor of being able to not only inform those individuals this summer that they were selected, but go from institution to institution and be able to hand them their medal and tell them, welcome to the inaugural class of the Hall of Fame of the ODAC. And, just to see the joy in their eyes when you do that, and the responses that I got originally when I did that in the summer was, it's really made this year special. And I'm looking forward to the next class, and then the classes after that, to kind of see, because we've just touched a very small pocket of individuals, but fortunately I think we've recognized the people, some of which we haven't had an opportunity to do yet, that were so instrumental in the growth of the league, the success of the league. We've had coaches in our league that coached for 30, 40 years. And it wasn't just longevity, it was influence and impact. We honored one this past weekend. And, the impact that she had on the individuals that she coached is immeasurable. And I think we all have a teacher or a coach or somebody that made a significant influence in our life. These people are, these are significant, bellwether places in people's hearts that they've made influences on them, and not only on the field of play for athletics, but just how they've interacted with their teammates, and they're being recognized for the right reasons.
This may be a terrible question.
No questions. There's no terrible question.
Wait and see.
Okay, all right.
But coaching at the Division III level versus, say, the Division I level, where we talked about the money that's involved and the pressure and, and all that. I mean, it feels like, and again, I may be wrong, but it feels like coaches at the Division III level, the mentoring, not parenting is the wrong word, but the bond that they want to feel with guys, because presumably they're going to be there longer, and it really is more about an experience of going from high school, the transition from being a kid to being an adult. You leave college and you're in the real world, and coaches at the Division I level, they're getting paid millions of dollars in a lot of cases, and there's a lot of pressure on them to win. But it just feels like coaches spend more time at the Division III level at their institutions and really have more of an impact potentially on the players that they coach.
I think anybody that played for Kirk Signetti, this past week would say he's been influential in their world, right? I do agree with you that, and I'm sure every coach has this in their mindset. I think it's hard to coach at our level. I mean, you have a limited staff. You're trying to do similar things. You're having to recruit. You don't have a recruiting coordinator. It's you. You may have an assistant coach. Oftentimes in our space, you may not even have a full-time assistant coach that's helping you. So what these coaches accomplish just on the field of play, fielding a team, fielding a competitive team, and winning and losing, hopefully winning more for them, obviously, than losing, is super impressive. But the development of the whole person is so important to all of them. And when you go back and look at success, and too often it's like, oh, well, somebody won 700 games. That was they had an amazing career. But if you dig down deep in it, they're developing the whole person the whole way through. And the people that have had immense amount of success in our world, just speaking in my little world of the ODAC, and others that I've been influenced by in the division, because I've seen a lot of them and met a lot of them over the years, the people that are developing the whole person are really paying dividends, not only for their program and themselves, but for their institutions as well. And it's an interesting observation, because I know there are people just at the NCAA convention, and there was an individual that had played for Pat Head Summit at Tennessee. And to watch her get an honor in the NCAA honors ceremony, and to say the words that she said about the influence that she had on her life. So I think all coaches kind of have a place that, should be revered. My dad coached for, 25 plus years at the high school level and was a high school administrator. And to see the outpouring of affection for him throughout that time, and the influence he had on the boys at the time, the men that he coached, they'd run through a wall for him. And it's because he genuinely cared about him. And I think that's true. I really do think that's true.
Circling back to the Hall of Fame for just a second,
Sure.
Brad. Was there, and I know we talked before we jumped on the air. And you said you were relieved that you didn't have to make any of those decisions.
No
the
question.
Schools made them all. Was, in your opinion, or was there a consensus? This person has to be like almost like a first, like, what you
yeah, no doubt. It was my predecessor. I mean, Dan Woldridge was a graduate of Lynchburg College and has an amazing story. Dan passed away. Gosh, I'm guessing it's been a year or two now. I'm losing track of time. As I grow older, it's harder for me to keep up with time behind me.
Amen.
But Dan was so influential in building the foundation of the league and watching it form. I think everybody would have put Dan at right there, right? And then when you have the conversation about who were those other people within the league, we have two other awards that are our pinnacle awards in the league. It's the Marge Berkeley and the Doc Jobson Award. Doc Jobson was a longtime track and field coach at Bridgewater College. He was a biology professor who found some species of salamander over the years. I mean, and you hear conversations about the influence of Doc and what Doc did in the 60s, 70s into the 80s and the influence that he had. He is one, and then the other was Marge Berkeley. And Marge had been, this is a really interesting story, Marge had been a professor at Lynchburg College, went on to Hollins University, then at Hollins College at the time, and was so impactful on the growth of women's athletics because at the time the ODAC was formed, it was an all-male league, and women were participating in what they called the AIAW, and that was in the early 80s. They made the transition. The AIAW folded, and NCAA absorbed women's athletics. Marge was like an associate commissioner of women's athletics and brought people in. But not only did Marge do that, Marge was also a professor of Dan Woldridge when he was at Lynchburg. So everything seems to kind of come full circle. So those three have kind of been the ones that the league have had on a pedestal for many years, named awards after them. They were instrumental in the founding of the league. Those were no-brainers because we had to make three choices in the ODAC office, and those were the three that we picked. So they were easy. Moving forward, it'd be tough.
I'm hearing lots of people with ties to Lynchburg College.
Pretty amazing, actually, no doubt. And, Lynchburg has made it. Bill Schellenberger is another that, stalwart Jack Toms are individuals that are being honored by them. Marie Lewis and Enza Steele are their four inductees, all coaches, all longtime coaches that had a huge influence on the league and won a ton of championships during their time. So, there's, again, it's been fun. I know that the next class, and you said, you don't want to have to choose them.
Right.
Fortunately for us, we're going to let the schools make another choice. We're going to go another round about the circle there and let them be the ones to determine who their next honorees are. Then we'll get into the third year where we actually have to make a choice. And it's going to be very difficult. I mean, a lot of the individuals we recognize up to this point have been administrators or longtime coaches or student athletes that it was like, how in the world could they not be in?
Of course, right? It's got to be.
But it's going to become very difficult. And there's some institutions that haven't put a student athlete up yet.
Wanted to ask you about a case that's in front of the Supreme Court.
Sure.
The transgender issue, men playing in women's sports. They talk about 70-30, 80-20 issues where most of the country sits here and goes, of course, right? I mean, that shouldn't be the case. And I know it was just a couple years ago that Roanoke College was in the news because they had an issue on their swim team and some of the women on that team stood up and said, no, this isn't, and I can imagine being in your seat where you're sitting there going, oh no, why is this falling in our lap?
No doubt. Well, I think for us at that time, we were in a different place with where the NCAA had set a rule, and our rules in the conference, we follow eligibility rules for the NCAA. We've been very prescribed with that since the beginning of the league in the 70s.
Is that, are there conferences who don't?
Sure, there are. I think there are leagues that you could certainly have a rule that, it was more stringent than the NCAA legislation. You can't be more lenient than, especially, I guess you could, but from a participation standpoint and what counts and what doesn't count, it's very complicated. So at that stage in time when that conversation was being had with the swimmer at Roanoke, the rule at the NCAA level was, it's very prescribed about, if you had a male transitioning to female, trans woman, that you had to have specific levels of testosterone. You should have had suppression therapy for a certain period of time. And a lot of that had been researched by the NCAA at the time through what they call the SSI, which is the Sports Science Institute. There is a very large committee that's consulted about anything that has to do with student-athlete well-being. And, the rule at the time was that if you met those thresholds, you were able to compete. If you dial that back a year or two before that, I think Leah Thomas was at the University of Pennsylvania and was swimming for the women's team at Penn at the time. And she was following the same protocol that had been allowed up to that point in time. So from our perspective, swimming is a very unique beast for us because we have no regular season competition in swimming as a conference. So knowing the opportunities that student athlete would have had would not have impacted the conference until we got to the conference championship. Because regular season determination would have been, as an institution, I'm going to choose to swim you or not swim against you. And, you have to follow the rules that make you eligible at the Division III level to be able to compete and count for a record or count as a result for your institution. And for us, we would have had to have addressed that issue and would have addressed it the same way we would have gone into it, is that she would have been eligible based on the NCAA rules at the time to compete in our championship that year. Turns out she did not move forward with competition that season. And as a result, we didn't have any issues about her competing or not competing in our championship.
On a personal level.
Yeah.
That pops up. What's going through your mind? Like, oh man, now it's hitting here.
Well, I think it doesn't really matter how you personally think about it, right? It matters what the rule is, and it matters what somebody else above you through the process of our governing association had made a decision that this was appropriate. Then it ultimately falls to the institution to determine what their rules are. And, you can have different rules if you wanted to. So as a conference commissioner, though, it really, you're like, it's up to you, Roanoke, or it's up to the NCAA. We don't make a decision on that. Well, we could make a decision. We could do something different, and then you've got institutions having that conversation. Well, you're going to have an open dialogue with your membership, specifically your presidents in the conference, to determine whether they want to do something different than what the NCAA allows. So it comes down to a vote from the presidents, to determine what's going on. For us, from an eligibility perspective, without a doubt, it would be a presidential decision. And our president's decisions up to that point had always been to explicitly follow the guidelines that had been set by the NCAA for eligibility. There was years ago when we talked about the non-traditional season a little bit earlier, we put more parameters around the non-traditional season than the NCAA did. And it really was very minor, but we agreed that we weren't going over what they said you could do. We were restricting it on our own. And as a result, we weren't out of line with what the NCAA rules were. But yes, unequivocally, that would have been an institutional to institutional discussion from a standpoint of the conference as a whole, getting those presidents together and make a decision to do something different than what the NCAA allowed. And now that rule's changed. So based on the executive order by the president, the NCAA has made a decision to change that rule. And, again, how that influences what happens in the future based on who's in the presidency or which party's in power, I don't know. I will say one thing about the timing of the Roanoke swimmer and just that whole period of time. There was a lot of discussion going on and ongoing discussion about interpretations of Title IX and what the Biden administration was doing with that at the time. And there was this idea that because the NCAA has 3 phases of their transgender policy, they were in phase 2. Phase 3 was waiting on determination as to how they were going to interpret Title IX. You throw that into an election year, and there's probably not a good time for them to necessarily roll it out. They sat on it. And as a result, obviously, the new administration made a decision to move in a different direction, and the NCAA followed suit, as did, I guess, the USOC and, and other groups as well. The irony of that, though, really coming down to it being a Title IX issue is that
and please correct me if I'm wrong, but Title IX was basically brought up to give women more of an opportunity to compete, in which, you have to have, is it an equal number of...
There's a lot of litmus tests to determine whether you're actually meeting it.
Okay.
And I think it depends. A lot of it is just equal percentages. So if you have, opportunities for, let's just use a percentage standpoint, and somebody's going to cringe because they're going to say, how can this guy be in this position and not know this off the top of his head? The bottom line is, the way I think our people look at it is, if you have 60% student body women, 40% men, your opportunities need to be similar in percentages.
Okay.
So if you have a football team, you may have more. So then how do you demonstrate the fact that you've actually investigated the fact that there isn't something? So you can survey the student body. You can ask if there are other interests. Are there club programs that are actively moving towards varsity status that might be able to help your women's representative numbers? Mm-hmm. Because it's very tough if you're at 60-40 and you have a football program to actually meet that percentage test. Very difficult.
Do you think, and you do have some schools in the Old Dominion Athletic Conference that play football?
We do.
And I don't know if this is on a professional level or a personal level, but doesn't it seem like football probably shouldn't count against the Title IX because of the number of players and just the fact that there's no women's sports that's the equivalent in terms of just sheer numbers?
It's not, but I think when you're looking at how you're doing things, there are equivalent sports that you can draw correlations to. And obviously, if somebody were to bring a concern forward, you would want to represent or make sure that you are doing the things properly in those equivalency sports, mm-hmm. men's and women's basketball, baseball, softball. Even the numbers in those sports, the roster sizes aren't the same. Basketball, as you would say, would be the same, but a baseball roster and a softball roster don't necessarily need to be the same numbers, because you don't need a pitching staff the same size as you do for softball teams you do for a baseball team. So I do think that there's some sensitivities as you move forward. You have to be aware of those things. I'm not sure I'm in the camp to where I don't think football should count. I do think there should be a recognition to know that if you have it, especially with the gender makeup of the way the majority of our student bodies are composed, maybe even in the population in general of the number of women attending colleges versus the number of men, I would think that the percentages favor women. I've been told that women rule the world anyway. So I'm very careful to make sure that I say that with all due respect, that, as you walk through those steps, it's pretty hard to make that number. And people are, you have some institutions that, are very strict about adhering to the rules of Title IX, that do a great job, a wonderful job of giving everybody equal opportunity. And they're still having a hard time meeting it if they have a football program that has 150 student athletes as part of it.
Yeah, because I think the thing most people point to is the number of men's sports that are cut because of the fact that, hey, we have a football team and that's 60, 70, 80 guys. Yeah. So sorry, wrestlers, you can't wrestle anymore. And while the intent seems good to give women more of an opportunity, there are a lot of schools looking at it from a financial perspective going, well, we can either create more women's sports or cut men's sports. Yeah. And next thing you know, and wrestling is one of the sports you talked about, and I know there are others where, they're gone. And then at the Division I level, when you look at the disparity, you also look at the financial aspect. And it's like the football program supports basically, in a lot of cases, every other athletic program going.
Well, you look at the NCAA, and the thing that's supporting the entire NCAA, the National Association, for the most part, is the men's basketball rights deal. And, I can't remember what percentage that is of the entire budget, but I'm going to go to a stretch and say it's more than 85% of the budget is dependent upon the Warner Brothers deal, with the Turner Warner Brothers deal for the men's basketball national championship. There are other components to broadcasting championships. They just did a really good deal and a great deal for everybody with ESPN that kind of takes, the Women's College World Series, the Men's College World Series, women's basketball kind of under one umbrella. But nothing compares to the amount of dollars that are had. And there are no football dollars that are part of the NCAA. I was going to say, I'm sure for people to understand that. They probably don't.
I was going to say, people are probably scratching their heads going, what about football? But that's not.
FCS money is there because it's part of the NCAA from a championships perspective, but FBS dollars related to football There's not a dollar of that passes through the NCAA. And, to Charlie Baker's defense as the president of the NCAA, who, in my opinion, is doing an incredible job. I mean, he is a politician. If there's a Republican that was elected as governor of the state of Massachusetts, you got to be pretty good at what you're doing. He's done a great job, and he's, it's tough. I mean, a lot of these lawsuits that the NCAA is dealing with right now are football related. They're engaged in football, and there isn't a dollar that's going through the NCAA that's related to Division FBS football, and they're footing the bill for a lot of the legal challenges that are happening in that space. A lot of ongoing conversation about how that works out. The Knight Commission does a lot of commentary about collegiate athletics and ways revenue should be distributed. And if anybody's really interested, it's worth a look because I think they have some really interesting ideas of how those football playing conferences, who are really the ones that are controlling the revenue, could better share that revenue and help everyone and help all men's and women's sports throughout the association. So that's way more money than what's being dealt with, I think, with the Division I men's basketball contract.
It was interesting for me to hear you say what a good job he's doing leading the NCAA because, man, the NCAA gets crucified over and over again for all these, we're talking about NIL and all these things that are just...
It's an impossible job, especially when you have, your own institutions that are involved in making the rules that are then on the other side of a lawsuit supporting a student athlete that's going against the rule that they've supported. Now, maybe they weren't in favor of the rule, but when your rules making body is the one that's actually on the other side suing you to some degree, it becomes really interesting. It's tough. I mean, that's a really difficult job. And I think he stepped into it at a very difficult time. And it goes back to a portion of the conversation we had earlier, which is not having the foresight. We all were in that situation, perhaps, to not see this coming. I mean, it had to be like a locomotive coming down a tunnel, right? And we had a conversation a number of years ago, even at the Division III level, when we started talking about NIL. And everybody was like, oh, yeah, I mean, that sounds like a great idea. Rich could have his jersey in the bookstore and sell his jersey and get a percentage of that. Well, certainly he should have the opportunity to do that. And then, of course, people get involved, boosters get involved, people do strange things when they're in a competitive environment. And, we're staring at what we're looking at now, which is, some people would argue a train that's kind of out of control.
How big a deal is NIL? Because we had touched on it earlier. At the high school level, it's kind of trickling down. How impactful is it at the Division III level, and do you see that changing?
I think we're starting to see it now. We're starting to see collectives at Division III institutions, some more focusing on one program, not specifically the entire program. I think one recently is trying to support the entire athletic program, but that's at an institution that's all male, not Hampton-Sydney, who's in our league, but Wabash. It's in Indiana. People are starting to kind of recognize that we're going to be dealing with it. And the reason why we're dealing with it, one, is that we do get trickle down. People ask questions, but we have high school athletes that are allowed to do it at their state level within their high school association that are coming to college, even at the Division III level, that may ask the question, hey, wait a second, like I had this option when I was in high school, may have been a recipient, and I'm interested in what you are doing as an institution. So we're doing our best. I'm trying to do my best to prepare our institutions this spring to have an open dialogue about what this looks like at the Division III level. And, there are people at the national office that have said, hey, this train's coming. You need to be part of it. And within the NCAA rules, within Division III rules, you can do it, but, you can't induce somebody to come and you can't pay them to play. Those are the two things you can't do. Now, a lot of people would make the argument that everything they read about what's happening at the Division I level, that's what's happening, right? Now, they can do it now because they have this institutional batch of money that they can track somebody with. But even at our level, those conversations are probably happening at the recruiting level. How do we address it? How do we position our institutions to be competitive, at the same time not be behind the eight ball? And then you have states. This is why it's so complicated to be doing what Charlie Baker's doing and the NCAA is trying to meander, is that you have states that have laws that allow somebody to circumnavigate the NCAA's rules based on the state law. So if you're doing it, and I think Virginia's one of them, you could just pay student athletes straight out. And if that's the case, the heck with what the NCAA rule is. It doesn't matter.
And
you can't enforce that, and how can you be an association when you can't enforce the rules?
And at the Division III level, you talked about the balance before.
Yeah.
And it would seem that NIL, and especially if you start getting into collectives and all that, that is a great opportunity to throw the balance way out of whack.
Well, that's why we're all holding our breath. I mean, when you go around the room in our league, there are competitive people in every seat. They all have reasons they want to be successful, and you're striving to get better. That's the whole thing. That's what you're doing in athletics all the time. You're trying to build the whole person, but you're trying to be competitive. I'm not sure they want to see it, because they like the purity of what we're doing. Mm-hmm. At the same time, is Pandora out of the box? Can we, or how can we do this the right way and keep the ideals of the division in tow? And I think we can do it, but it's going to be we're going to have to be very cautious about how we approach it.
As we move forward for Division III athletics and in general, and maybe the ODAC specifically, we just touched on NIL. We talked before about redshirting and different opportunities or how that may change. What other challenges or opportunities do you see on the horizon?
Yeah, well, I think it would be dereliction of duty for me not to talk about just the challenges that higher education is facing right now, and it's coming from multiple angles. And I think it's important that we stay true to the mission of what we're doing. I think our institutions have done a great job of that. There's, the demographic enrollment cliff is there. Our institutions, and I think all colleges across the country, are facing this idea that there are fewer high school graduates available to be able to go to college. And as a result of that, there are fewer people who enroll. And those institutions that are small, liberal arts-based institutions that are dependent upon enrollment are going to have to reinvent themselves and come up with alternative ways to do their business as they move forward. They have to evolve. They can't stay the way they are. There's some that are resourced enough from an endowment perspective that won't have to do as much, can probably stay true to what they're doing, can fill their class, but there are others that are going to have to be creative. And I think that's the biggest challenge that's facing our institutions as a whole. How do we do that? I want athletics to complement what we're doing. I want it to help drive it, but ultimately that's not the goal here, right? The goal is for someone to enter college, get an education, go out and be a better person and contribute to society.
But offering more athletic programs
it
is
helps.
Something that brings kids.
And that's conceptually, we've been doing that for a while, and I think we've done it well. I just want athletics to complement our institution's mission to be able to get there. And you worry about the tail wagging the dog, and we're not at that stage yet, which is great. And I hope that we continue down that path, because I think it's the right way to go.
Brad, thank you, man. This has been a pleasure. I really have enjoyed talking to you and learning a lot more about, Division III versus the others and the different challenges and opportunities. And it's been fascinating. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Anytime I can talk about the league and what we're doing and what our institution's doing is a real pleasure.
30 more years, maybe?
Oh boy, I don't know. If I was a betting guy, and you know what, you can't bet. That's another thing going on. I wouldn't bet on me for 30 years. No.
Thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.